So now I want to welcome all of you to the Friday Night Lecture Series sponsored by the Scandinavian Heritage Foundation. Can you not hear? Scandinavian Heritage Foundation and the Department of Foreign Languages and Literatures here at Boston State. It gives me great pleasure to introduce one of my compatriots, Dr. Lisbeth Goddik, who is going to speak about the wonderful world of cheeses. And let me tell you a little bit about her before we get started. Lisbeth Goddik grew up in Denmark, on a farm in Denmark, but immigrated to the US when her parents came over here to farm in the Willamette Valley. Professional work experience includes production of work at 3 different Danish dairy plants and 3 years at the Creamery International Research Center in Paris. She also worked in New Zealand, Canada, and Norway. She gets around. She received her graduate degrees in food science from Cornell University and Oregon State University. She has worked at Oregon State University since 1999 and also in dairy processing, extension specialist, and associate professor in food science. She and her family recently returned from a 1-year sabbatical in France where she studied artisan production of raw cheeses. I must tell you something. Lisbeth didn't go to France just to study cheese. She also rounded up a husband there. She's married to a Frenchman. So let us, Lisbeth go and talk about the wonderful world of cheeses.
All right. Thank you, Odyssey. All right, does that work? Carl, good. So I have the green light to go ahead. So welcome everybody. Thank you for coming here tonight. I hope we'll spend about 45 minutes talking cheese, and I hope many of you enjoy cheeses. And probably I am about as passionate about cheese as you can come. But actually my position at OSU is cheese, yogurt, ice cream. I do work with all the dairy products. I already got a couple of questions about what this funny title means, the ODI Bodyfeld Professor. It's because the dairy industry in Oregon Dairy Industries, collected money to support dairy research at Oregon State. So they collected money for professorship, and that's my professorship now. But let's move right on to talk about cheeses. This is a little bit about my agenda. We're talking about how to make cheese and why are there so many cheeses, the history of cheese. Certainly a little bit about Danish cheeses. I know that we have people from Finland and Norway and other countries. And to those of you, I just say that's too bad. We're going to focus on the Danish cheeses. Finally, a little bit about the group that I work with now, the Artisan Cheese makers here in Oregon. And we have some samples for you to taste afterwards. Now, just to make sure that you guys are all on your toes, are sitting down and not falling asleep now that the light is off, I want you to help me identify where these cheeses are from. They're all from one country. England, very good. Yep. Italy. The fresh mozzarella, if nothing else, should give it away. The Spain, the Manchego, the best known Spanish sheep milk cheese. And by the way, if you wonder about, it's really easy to remember because the sheep are called the Manchego sheep and they're in the Manchego region of Spain. The windmills you see on all the Manchego cheeses are of course from Don Quixote. That's where he was roaming around in his youth. These? No, Danish cheeses. Yeah, there we go. Good, Dutch cheeses. The weirdest looking cheeses in the world all come from one country. The French cheeses, yeah. This is the fastest growing cheese category in the US. The Mexican cheeses. These are the new American cheeses. Because now you can find just about any type of cheese in the US that's being made. And that's really the exciting thing we're observing the last 10 years here in the US in the dairy market. And of course, for the cheese production to be growing so quickly, it really comes from cheese consumption. It doesn't matter how good cheeses people are producing if you don't have people eating them. And indeed, cheese making is a field to be in dairy today. You can see here it shows American consumption of cheese over the last 20, nearly 30 years, and we're just about above 33 pounds per American per capita. Now, if you are producing fluid milk, for example, each year, you know one thing for sure, Americans are going to drink less milk each and every year. So it's much better being in cheese production because that's what carries the dairy industry today. Now, the good news is not only our American consumption of cheese here increasing each year, but marketing people in the cheese companies, they look at the data from other countries. And you can see with a little marketing, a little good education and training, you can get Americans perhaps to eat as much cheese as the Danes are doing, which is nearly doubling the cheese consumption as what's going on in the US. In the US, there are two giants in the field of dairy, and that's of course the mozzarella and it's the cheddar. They're up here. They're the cheeses that's been primarily consumed. But what we're talking about today are basically the cheeses down here, the specialty cheeses. Today, the pink line that's going up and up and up, that's a mozzarella. And today there's much more mozzarella being produced and consumed than cheddar. And I assume you all know why mozzarella is so popular. The pizza cheese. If it wasn't for pizza, there would be 1/3 less cows out on the fields today. The pizza has truly carried the dairy industry in Oregon, because you can see in the U.S. in general. The dairy farmers owe a lot to the pizza. What's also interesting is this cheese that used to be identified as the American cheese, the American processed cheese, is now the one cheese that's really going down in consumption. People no longer believe that a cheese should come out of a can or should be wrapped in tiny little plastic bags. So there's really an increased sophistication out on the market when it comes to cheese consumption. And indeed, the craft processed cheeses are just going down, down, down. Oops. Yeah. So a little bit, are you going to tell me what I did wrong here?
Here's a mouse.
Okay. Okay. Well, we're in business again. So if you ask an artisan cheesemaker, if you go to the farmer's market here in Portland, they're going to tell you cheese making is an art. And that's why my cheese is $35 a pound. If you go ask one of my students, the answer they should give you is that cheese making is really the application of chemistry, microbiology, biochemistry, and engineering. And it's all about manipulating the proteins in milk, because cheese making is dealing with the milk proteins. So that's the side where we apply the research to where the artisan cheesemaker applies the skills and the art. So few words. We only have a few minutes to get into how do you make cheese? And I assume many of you actually have some basic of understanding of the cheese making process. Obviously, we start with milk. Next step is a fermentation. Cheese is a fermented product just like wine and beer. And then the fermented milk is coagulated. So you start with milk, you add the bacteria, then you add a chymosin enzyme, and then you have to concentrate this coagulum. It takes about 10 pounds of milk to get 1 pound of cheese. And so that's another reason why you'd say cheese is a pretty expensive product. But just think about you have 10 times as much milk that went into it to begin with. But how to get rid of all that water and concentrate these proteins up, that's really what a lot of the cheese making process is about. And then of course the cheese needs to ripen. When you have a fresh cheese like mozzarella, ricotta, cottage cheese, if you were to say what is the taste of those cheeses, well, it's really very bland. You can taste salt, and then it's basically the flavor of the milk. There's nothing more to the fresh cheeses. It's during ripening that the flavor develops, where the proteins and the fat breaks down. So the conclusion to this, well, we're not quite done with the talk, but one of the take-home messages I want you to go home with is that cheese is a very clean product. You go from milk, you add a little bacteria, enzyme, salt, and you have cheese. Now there are thousands of cheeses out there, but every single cheese, with very few exceptions, contain those 4 ingredients. And it's really fascinating. When you go, this is truly the ideal processed food because they're so different, a liquid watery product you start with, you end up with that solid mass of proteins. Now you have very, very strong variations in flavor, taste, aroma of these different cheeses, but we're not adding any of that to the cheese. It's already in there. You'll never look at the ingredient label of a cheese and see contains natural aromas, natural taste, all those things that could be in there. It's not in there because the taste, the aromas of the cheese is already in the milk to begin with. And yet all of you have tasted milk, all of you have drunk quite a bit of it probably throughout your life, and milk is very, very bland. There's really not much to milk. It has a clean, slightly sweet taste, nothing to do with the taste of cheese. And yet we're not adding anything except these enzymes, the proteins, the salt, before we hit this stage. And that's what I find really, really interesting about cheese, is that all you're doing is basically releasing the flavors that are hiding within this cheese. It's the breakdown of the proteins and the breakdown of the milk fat. That's what gives you those flavors. And the different cheeses, you are controlling different parameters, and you get different types of breakdown of the protein. And that's what gives you a different tasting cheese. So really, really interesting concept that, again, that you're out of this, that has basically no flavor. You can create so much without adding any flavors to it. So if you think back on cheese making throughout the history, we know that cheese making has a more than 6,000 year history. And today I can tell you about the enzymes, the bacteria, how we manipulate the proteins. But 6,000 years ago, they could still make cheese without having a clue what a bacteria and enzyme were. So how did they actually do that? And of course, it's really in many ways a miracle. The one ingredient, of course, they had the milk. The bacteria they had naturally because they had no idea about how to sanitize the animals before milking. So their milk was really dirty. So naturally, they had plenty of bacteria for their cheese production. They then didn't have a lot of watertight containers. In fact, what they had were the stomachs of calves, kids, lambs, of young animals. That were their containers that they used to transport the milk around in. And it just so happens that these stomachs are the only natural source of the chymosin enzyme. So by pure luck, they had these ingredients that go together to make cheese. Because really, when you think about it, this is where we're going to go back to. The step from here to there is not obvious. If you didn't know better, if you came from the planet Mars and somebody gave you some milk and a cheese and said, we made cheese from this milk, you'd say, no way. There's no obvious connection there. And if it wasn't for the fact that they had the bacteria and the enzyme from these stomachs for transporting the milk around, they may never have invented cheese. It's perfectly possible we could be today without having a product like cheese as part of our diet. And it also should make you wonder if there are other products out there that are just waiting to be discovered. And I'm sure there's no doubt that, in the future we'll be eating products, and not just highly processed products, but products out there that we weren't dreaming of that they could actually exist. So just waiting for the food scientist or somebody else to come around and develop them. So a little bit back, let's continue going back in history. Cheese making originated basically around the Mediterranean Sea, but especially in the areas around Lebanon, Israel, Egypt, the Arabian countries, and northern Africa. We have stories about the Mongolians traveling around, bringing their milk in these bags with them, and turning it into curd as they are traveling. From Egypt, we have stone carvings that show some of the oldest processing of cheese. What's fascinating about in Egypt was that cheese was truly an upper class product in those days. The priests knew how to make cheese, and they were not sharing that information. So it's a very secretly held process, and truly a product for the elite. Now, I stole this picture off the internet from Tour Egypt, and there's a real big problem with it. If we have any alert people here, maybe you know what's the problem with this picture. Yeah, the cow is very big, but there's another problem. Just the fact that it is a cow In those days, they got the milk from the goats and sheep. They didn't have cows around. Cows are high maintenance and not that easy to deal with. There's also a number of references, written references about cheese. And of course, the Old Testament talks about cheese, or it talks about the cheese of kine. But just as fascinating, I find, if you think back to what you're reading back in high school, Odyssey, the man who went out and took 5 years to come back home to his wife. Well, on that trip, he actually met the Cyclops. You guys remember the Cyclops, these big monsters with one eye in the middle of the head? And he got stuck in a Cyclops cave. And while the Cyclops was out, poor Odyssey had plenty of time to watch the cheese making that was going on, or had been going on. And for one thing, it talks about cheese racks were loaded with cheeses, and there were more lambs and kids that his pens could hold. So that already means that he had mixed breed cheese. He had milk from goats and he had milk from sheep that he was mixing together. And he was draining the cheese, it says, in wicker strainers. So very similar to the fresh goat cheese we are getting today. That's what Homer was writing about many years ago in the Odyssey. Also, the Odyssey was written, people think, about 800 BC. But before that, if you think back to your history lessons, actually the Greeks were not writing. So it was an oral tradition. Stories were told from one person, from generation to the next. So the belief is that the Odyssey is much older than the 800 years BC. So they were talking about this Cyclops for much longer. Now the Greek were very good at art, very good at their sculptures, but they were eventually, as you know, Rome became the Roman Empire, took over Greece, and one of the things the Romans were much superior to the Greek was their engineering. They built structures that are still in use today, and this is a Roman cheese grater. If you look at that one, it looks a lot like what we are using today, and that's really fascinating. Thousands of years ago, the Romans came up to something like that to make cheese. Now, also what was great about the Romans was that they actually brought the cheese to the people. It was people in the Roman army were making cheese as they were traveling. Think back again to history. The Romans actually invaded most of Europe, southern England. There were Romans everywhere in northern Africa, and they brought cheese-making traditions with them and skills everywhere. Now we have written documents that they had over 13 cheeses, specific different cheeses that they were making in those days. And they were also the first ones to, instead of just making this fresh cheese that kind of hangs and concentrates, they were actually pressing cheese. And this is a Roman cheese press and cheese mold that were found, it's thought to be about from 300, or in that century at least. And if you look at it, it's a beautiful mold. You can see, well, maybe you can't see from the back, but the whey would run out of here. So the moment you turn this whole stone cheese mold upside down, you'd have the most gorgeous cheese there that's dry and with a beautiful pattern on it. And that's what the Romans were making so long time ago. Now, after the Romans, and I could spend more time about it, but it's really not that exciting, because Romans were the ones that made cheese make this great leap forward. And then they were perfecting the recipes of cheese, mostly in southern Europe, again around the Mediterranean countries. So what did happen, though, in all these countries, we had this tremendous multiplication of cheese types. And really, there truly are thousands of cheeses today, and many of them, there's a specific history to that cheese. So when I was on sabbatical, and by the way, also, I picked up my husband about 25 years before going on sabbatical. It wasn't quite so exciting, my last stint over there. But in eastern France, in the Comté region where I spent the year, in those days, it's a mountainous region. It's just north of the Alps. And in the summers, they would take their herds of cows and bring them up on these mountains for grazing in the meadows up there. And when you bring a cow to the top of the mountain, you can't tell her to stop producing milk. In fact, she produces a lot of milk up there. So the people had to figure out what to do with this milk. And what they did was they made really big cheeses. Because again, imagine if they made little camembert cheeses this size, they would have had about 1 million cheeses to bring down at the end of the season. So they made cheeses as big as you can possibly make them. And the Comte, Emmental, Gruyere, all these cheeses from that region are about 110 pounds. And 110 pounds is the weight that a man is supposed to be able to flip, because these cheeses have to be turned 180 degrees or upside down about every 2 days. You go through, and there's a special skill to it. I certainly saw the man doing that in France, and there's obviously not a lot of women doing that because it is really heavy. But they made these very large cheeses, and also if you're up there on the mountain in the good old days, you couldn't bring these cheeses down every Friday. In fact, all the cheeses went down with the cows at the end of the season. The end of the season when the snow was coming. So they brought the cheeses down, but they were stuck then. They couldn't get out of their valleys. So the cheeses all ripened throughout the summer and then the whole winter, and the next year they were put on market. So by necessity, the cheeses they made in the summer in this whole region of France were cheeses that have to age for about a year before they're consumed. However, once the cows came down from the mountains, and the Comte, by the way, I would have liked to tell you, I have it for tasting for you, but I forgot that one. I brought all the others, but that one's still home in my refrigerator. The next one is there, though, and this is the winter cheese. So the cows came down from the mountains, and in those days, a farm would have 1 or 2 dairy cows. That was it. So obviously, at that point, they're not making 110-pound cheese of this size, because you'd have to collect the milk for 2 weeks before you have enough milk for making one cheese. So they made much smaller cheeses. And what they did was that they would milk the cows in the morning, change that milk into curd, cover the curd in ash so that it would last, and then in the evening they'd milk their cows again, once more they'd make curd, and they'd combine the morning and evening curd together, and that would be their cheese, the one cheese of the day. Now, because there was ash around this cheese from the morning milking, that ash would be straight through the middle of the cheese, as you can see, never mind, as you can see right here. And even today, if you want to make that cheese, you have to put a layer of ash, food grade ash, but ash nevertheless through that. And right now I'm working with some cheesemakers here in Oregon who are thinking about, let's burn some Ponderosa pine or Douglas fir, grind it up, make sure there's no bacteria in it, and put it in the middle of our cheese. Because that's the true way of reflecting the terroir. So where the cheese is from, being in Oregon, for example. And that cheese, keep an eye for it, it's out there. Now, if you're a good businessman, and believe it or not, the French dairy processors generally are pretty good at business. Now, then you would not make a big cheese that has to ripen for a long time if you live right next to a city. And indeed, the people who live, the dairy farmers and processors next to Paris, they came up with completely different cheeses. They came up with the bloomy rind cheeses. The very fastest way that you can possibly develop flavor in a cheese is to put mold on it. Molds are we call it proteolytic. They break the proteins down extremely fast. So these cheeses with white mold on the outside, within 3 weeks, they have a very strong flavor, which makes them ideal because that way they can be sold on the market 3 weeks after you started making the cheese. And Brie, Camembert, all the cheeses we know as bloomy rind, they're all basically from a small area east and west of Paris. So I could talk about every single cheese, and there would be a story like that behind them, and that's what makes it so fascinating. The cheeses exist for a specific reason. There's a reason why they look that way, their size, they look, the intensity of their flavor. There's always a fascinating story behind them. But obviously, to not keep you guys any longer than what you were planning on, we're going to move on. And this is where there's a complete jump in my presentation. I apologize. Normally people have a good way of flowing a presentation from A to B to C. Yeah, here we're jumping. And this is in honor of the Danes, of course. And again, too bad for you guys who are not with Danish background. We used to have a lot of dairy companies, dairy processing companies in Denmark. They would tend to look like this. They're white and yellow, red roof, very nice and cozy. Now they tend to look big silos and not quite as typical anymore. But certainly there's still a lot of dairy production going on. So if you look through the history of Danish production, well, it used to be women making the dairy products. And in fact, I didn't put it in here, but going back to the Viking ages, times of the Vikings, it was the women making cheese. They were making cheese already back in those days. It was not the men. You guys all know that the Vikings were off, who knows where, leaving the women to run the country and make the cheese and the butter. So in the 18th century, it was actually the herregård, and I didn't know how to translate that, Mom.
Big estates?
Yeah, the big estates where the farmers who worked there actually didn't own the land, but they rented the little farms, and in return had to give their milk to the big owners of the large farms. There was dairy production was moved on to these large farms in Denmark. But they tended to not pay the poor farmers who actually produced the milk or had cows that produced the milk. They didn't pay them very well. So in the 19th century was the start of the Andals Movement, or the cooperatives, where the farmers would go together and start producing their own dairy products, because that way they were assumed a fair price for their milk. And of course, the principle, as we know today in cooperatives as well, one person, one vote. It doesn't matter how large your farm is or was. And I know, for example, in 1882 was the very first co-op, dairy processing co-op was established in Denmark. One thing, oh yeah, there we go. In Wedding? I don't even know where that is at. Jylland, undoubtedly. One thing that made that a possibility, what really started the huge Danish production of dairy products, was an equipment called the centrifuge. Centrifuge is really a thing that spins very quickly around. You'll find it in every single dairy plant all over the world today. But in the good old days, if you wanted to do something with the butter, like make butter, then you'd have to wait for this cream to rise on the surface of the milk. You'd skim it off, and then you could make the butter. It took a while. But here with the centrifuge, which was invented in the 1870s, suddenly you could skim off the cream very quickly on large quantities of milk, and that's what made large-scale butter production possible. A little bit of what's going on in Denmark today. If you look here in the numbers, and I don't know if you can see it from the back, but we still have cooperatives are the driving force in Danish dairy. And you can see the numbers. We had 1,256 and 50 in 1955. 2007, there were 12. But that's really not the right number. And there are some smaller private companies. So less and less of these companies. But the fact is there's really only one dairy company. And many of you might know that, at least if you have an agricultural background, that today, basically all the milk produced in Denmark is processed by Alla Foods. And Alla Foods is not only just a Danish company, it's the biggest Swedish cooperative that merged with the biggest Danish cooperative to give you Alla Foods. So I got in Denmark a dairy engineering degree, and today you can't get that anymore, simply because the government decided there's no purpose just educating people to work for one company. So today there's only food science in Denmark. There's no longer the dairy engineering. If you look at the size, Alla Foods deals with 3,911 million kilos of milk per year. The next one is around 70 million. So it's really Goliath and David and the others. So very, very much one company. And again, a few years ago, so we have this Danish-Swedish company, Alla Foods. And some years ago, there was really serious talks about merging with the Dutch Campania, That's the biggest Dutch co-op. Luckily, they didn't do it. But if the idea is, if you continue that way, there'll be one dairy company left in Europe, for example. A little bit about, just in case we have any dairy farmers in here, just some quick statistics about what's going on in Denmark. Today, there's about 121 dairy cows per dairy farm, which to Europe is pretty big. Denmark and England have the largest dairy farms compared to Southern Europe, where you'll still see the average being about 35, 45 cows per farm. Of course, that's much lower than what you see in the US. The dairy farms here are much, much bigger. Does any of you know the biggest dairy farm in Oregon? How many cows? Yeah, 3 Mile. How many cows are there out there?
2,000-3,000, I don't know.
Much, much more than that. Last I heard, and I don't even know, they don't allow me out there, but last I heard they were milking about 9,000 cows. But that's just a fraction because they had replacement heifers and so on. So I heard there were about 50,000 heads of cattle at those out there. So it's no wonder they keep them out east of the Cascades for very obvious reasons. But a very big difference from the size of the dairy farms in Denmark. Then the export of the dairy industry, and I'll move quickly through this. It's about 22% of the entire ag export is dairy, and cheese being the main product they're exporting, which is why I put the butter up there. But if you go and look at cheese, and I'll have some Danish cheeses for you out there, the main ones is big. We'll just look at this one. Over half the cheeses in Denmark are what you call the semi-hard cheese. And that's the Esrum, Danbo, Havarti, Fontina, that type, a kind of soft cheese, a little like the Goudas if you're more familiar with those. But that's really the number one Danish cheese type. When I was looking into what Danes and the history of cheese, I came across this quote, and I'm not going to translate it because at OSU we talk about being politically correct. But it says, at danskerne ellers blev kaldt ostens japanere. And for those of the Danes here, you'll understand what that means. So Danes are really, really good at imitating everybody else. We've gotten all the cheeses we have are basically cheeses that we got from other countries. I wish I could say that we developed all these wonderful cheeses, but the truth is we were imitating, which is not a bad thing. There is one exception though, and that is the Ryost. This is the one cheese, our claim to fame is the Ryost, which is smoked. It's a fresh cheese, and then you smoke it, mostly from Fyn. The other cheeses I have for you out here, I have Arti. This is probably the one you see very often. It has very frequently Denmark's finest made in Wisconsin, which is what you tend to see on the labels over here. Another one that's out here that's getting more and more important in our delis and the supermarkets are the Danish Fontina. Fontina is a cheese that's from Italy, from the Andals Valley, but very popular from Denmark as well. But now, with this big block that I kind of threw in there because you guys are from Scandinavia, we're going to leave Denmark behind. And I know the Finns in the back seat are happy, but this is really where we are all of us. This is where we live, and those are really the cheeses that matter to us today, I think. So if you look in Oregon, something happened. This is the number of dairy cows in Oregon and the milk produced in Oregon, and this funny bump around here. And some could say this is the time I started working, but that's not really what happened. Something happened in Oregon about 8 years ago. Do you guys know what it was?
3 Mile.
Excuse me?
3 Mile.
Yeah. To put it a little bit different, it's the second plant that Tillamook built over by Boardman. So just Tillamook, that today processes about half the milk produced in Oregon. When they decided to build a second plant, it meant this huge bump for the dairy industry here. Though I've just told you it's basically just one dairy farm, but there are a few more. So I don't know if we've got time, but normally I ask people to go through a little exercise on the dairy companies in Oregon. And we have time. Okay, so can you name some of our companies? Tillamook, yes, very good, excellent. Farmers Co-op in McMinnville, good. Valley of the Rogue. Actually, Rogue Creamery. We had a company called Valley of the Rogue, which closed about 5 years ago. It was down Grants Pass. Bandon was bought up by Tillamook about 9 years ago, maybe. And the cheese that carries the Bandon label, of course, is Tillamook cheese. Most of it is a cheese from the Columbia River plant. Dairy Gold, yes, the largest cooperative on the in the Pacific Northwest. Very large company. Dairy Gold, for example, produces much, much more cheese than Tillamook. But you'll never, ever see a single cheese in the supermarket with the Dairy Gold label on it. That's because the poor people in Dairy Gold did not establish their label. So it has to be sold as Fred Meyer cheese, or Safeway cheese, or Kroger cheese, potentially. And that, of course, means for the poor Dairy Gold that they get an inferior price for their product because they don't have a well-established label. So any other companies? Curly's, a very nice company with a long history in Salem. Happens to be that they're a company, do we have anybody here with Wilcox connections? So a company up in Washington first bought Echo Springs Dairy, and after about a year shut it down. Echo Springs was in Eugene. Then they bought Curly's in Salem, and after about a year they shut it down. And what they did was really, Curly's had the milk order for Costco, but they wanted that order. They wanted the clients from Curly, but they could produce it from their Wilcox farms up in Washington, which I think is probably the way it goes, except Wilcox then shut down their milk production in Washington as well. So that one company single-handedly managed to destroy 2 of Oregon's dairy companies, and then self-destructed anyway. You'll still see the label as egg farm. They're an egg farm today. All right? Alpenrose, very good company in Portland here. You probably are familiar with some of all the great work they do for their community. They even for many years had low-income housing out of their dairy plant and just do a lot of things for children and outreach. Nancy's, actually really Springfield Dairy. And they're probably the most unique dairy company in Oregon, in part because of the Kesey family that owns them, and you're probably familiar with Ken Kesey. So I could tell you stories the whole evening about Springfield Creamery, but the story to stick with, though, we'll have to meet somewhere else if I'm telling you the other stories, but these are that they are the only company that's selling yogurt in every single state of the U.S., selling any dairy product in every single state. So they have national distribution, even more than Tillamook. And they make fabulous products. They're at OHSU is doing a study right now where they're actually feeding Nancy's yogurt to patients as they go into the intensive care unit and when they come out. And they've found a significant improvement in survival rate of the patients who go through the intensive care unit because of the probiotic bacteria in Nancy's yogurt. So if you don't know what to eat for breakfast, Nancy's yogurt is really a good place to start.
Where do you buy it? Where do you buy Nancy's yogurt?
Fred Meyer in the health food section has it, and health food section Safeway normally has it as well. So it should be in most supermarkets selling. They're pretty. They've done a really good job. So I could keep us guessing and talking about the dairy companies, but here they are, the kind of more traditional established dairy companies here. Mallory's, Deluxe, Lockmeat, Oregon Ice Cream. There are a number of them, and that is really, really unique. If you go just north of the border, east or south, there'll be, for example, Washington has about 5 dairy companies, and they have 3 times as much milk. And Idaho, I'll tell you, has even less companies and much, much more milk. So we're the only state, together with a few on the East Coast, that has a lot of these smaller, independently owned dairy companies. And it's really part of what makes it very fascinating working in Oregon. You know, Eberhard Dairy, east of the mountains. Yo Cream, that's actually in Portland. It's doing tremendously well right now. Yo Cream is now the 2nd biggest dairy company in Oregon, making frozen yogurt that actually contains yogurt. Larson's Creamery. Oh, yeah, Larson's Creamery, of course, just because of you guys. Larson's Creamery was owned by Tony Larson, who was a Dane. And the second owner was actually a nephew, I believe, of Tony Larson, was Oscar Larson. And Oscar Larson just passed away probably two years ago. One of these great Danes that, a pillar of the society and support a lot of things, including the dairy processing program and OSU. And really a great, nice old Dane that I think he passed away at 99, but had a tremendous impact. There have been several Danish people in the dairy industry in Oregon. And Oscar, unfortunately, basically is the last of them. So, well, now there's me, but... So here I mentioned just briefly that we've lost some of them. Raven Creamery, Curly's Dairy, Bandon, Valley of the Rogue, Echo Springs. The only one we got was Tillamook's second creamery. So there are good news though. The blue line there is the number of these traditional dairy plants, your Tillamook, Umpqua, and so on. And it seems to be every 2-3 years we lose one. So it's kind of downward trend. They're not very fast, but we are losing them. But the great news here is really this red line, which is a lot of fun, and that's the Artisan Cheese makers. And as you can see, for the last couple of years, we have more Artisan Cheese makers than we have traditional dairy plants in Oregon. Of course, if you looked at it based on the quantity of milk produced, they produce less than 0.1% of the milk in Oregon. But they provide a lot of excitement about the Made in Oregon dairy brand, basically. And here they are. You can basically see from the name whether they are cow's milk or goats or sheep milk. Because, for example, Willamette Valley Cheese Company, right there, they're cow. If you look at Mama Terra's Micro Creamery, that should let you know they're goat. Siskiyou Crest, Folia Farm, they're goat. Fernage, Fraga Farm, Alcy Acres, all of those are goat cheese places. But of course our most successful one is Rogue Creamery. And Rogue Creamery is down in Central Point, and they just this past summer won Best in Show at the American Cheese Society, the very best cheese made in the US. And that's a really, really big deal for people in the dairy industry. So the fact that won that cheese means that, they'll be famous for many, many years and will do very well. They already were doing extremely well. They bought this completely run down creamery in Central Point. I visited just before they purchased it. And there was this old Swiss cheesemaker who was walking around smoking in the cheese plant. He made cheese about once a week or something, not very much at all, and looked like it was just waiting to close. And then these two gentlemen with not a lot of cheese making experience, with a lot of marketing experience, took it over. And they just turned that place around and have done the most exciting things with that creamery, but also they're really behind half the other artisan cheese companies in Oregon because they're collaborating, they're helping, they're supporting everybody who's starting up. So pretty amazing, this one, it really, really stands out. So a little bit on terminology, though I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. We're saying artisan cheese, farmstead dairy, specialty cheese. So just in the future, so you know what it means. There's no definition of these things. And if it's not for food processors, if it's not in the code of federal regulations, it really means nothing. So people have come up with their own terms, and we tend to say artisan cheese is cheeses that are made in smaller quantities with a lot of hands and work involved, low mechanization, but nothing prevents Kraft from saying they're an artisan cheese company. Farmstead dairy is really when you make the dairy product at the same place where you're producing the milk. And finally, specialty cheese is used as another word for artisan cheese. If you look in Oregon, between farmstead cheeses, all of these, and artisan, meaning they're non-farmstead, they're buying the milk. And then cow, goat, or sheep. It's fascinating to see over here that nearly all our artisan places are farmstead, and they are nearly all goat. That's basically what we're seeing, a lot of smaller goat cheese places. The Tumalo Farms over in Bend, have you tried their product? Last year, these guys won #2 at the World Cheese Competition, which is held in Wisconsin. Yeah, well, but they won the second prize, second best in show. And World Cheese Competitions, not like American Cheese Society, because these guys, the World Cheese Competition, they're all the big established companies in the US and in the rest of the world as well. And they do never, ever, ever give prizes to goat cheese makers. They give them all to the cow cheeses. So this is the first time a goat's milk cheese placed so highly in that competition. So we've won lots and lots of awards, but one of the reasons why is that we have really good milk here in Oregon. You do actually, you don't, but there are people who keep these things as statistics, the USDA, and there's actually data that shows that we have the third best milk in the nation. And if you look at the number 1 and 2 were Rhode Island and Montana. And if you know anything about dairy, you'll know that those states don't count. They basically don't produce milk. So we really in Oregon has the best milk in the nation. That's so I'm gonna finish up here today just with a few slides from what's going on at OSU. And OSU is of course the only place in Oregon you can study food science and also dairy processing as part of that. And when I got my job, I inherited a terribly old, run-down plant that used to be a dairy plant at OSU. It was shut down about 30 years ago because a local dairy company complained it was unfair competition, so we closed down. And basically, it was just storage, and mostly for the wine people who would OSU take over everything. We had very old equipment, and this is the equipment we have today. So I got some very, very nice equipment from France that the company, we paid for half and they donated the rest. The idea being that companies that wanted to purchase it could come to OSU and see how the equipment functions. This is a little more, this is where the area you saw before that was very messy. We got new floors, new equipment. We also got some Dutch equipment in, so it looks really nice. And last year was the first year we started teaching in that facility. You can see some of our students doing cheese making. And they're getting a great experience and training in the field today. We have this idea, it's a 3-phase project at OSU. The first was to renovate the pilot plant. We've done that. The second is to make an incubator plant where companies are supposed to come in, start making cheese, and then sell it. And if they're successful, they go out and make the huge investment and build their own Artisan Cheese plant. In fact, this morning I was up early working in our dairy plant with a young guy of Italian descent who's in there making cheese, and he wants to be on the farmer's market with his cheese in a few months. So hopefully on the farmer's market, if you see here in Oregon somebody in Portland with an Italian accent, you'll know he started at OSU. The final stage is we want to have our own cheese, an independent plant, not just in the old facility, but build our own cheese plant. And the idea is then we'll have an OSU cheese. Just like if any of you know what's going on at WSU up in Pullman. The Cougar Gold, yes. So really this is how it looks. They're putting cheese in cans. But we all know that canned products are out. It's the past. And this is where we expect to go in the future. So that's really all I have for you guys tonight here. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions.
This was wonderful. I can't believe how good you were.
I take that as a mixed compliment. Well, thank you.
You're great. You get an A+.
Okay. Well, thank you.
And
Thank you.
There might be questions. I have the first one.
Sorry.
I just want to say, if you make it from whole milk, that it says 13% fat and 15% fat on the cheese. If you make
On
it
the
from whole
cheese,
milk, yeah.
because it's the way we look at count fat, it's out of the solids. So it's really only fat and proteins.
I see.
So you completely ignore the water. So the cheeses are never as fat as what the label indicates. You can have a cheese that's at 50% fat. Or at least that's how the Danish cheese is on the label. And it's not, because you're ignoring the water. So the reality is less.
Okay. Thank you.
You answered my question.
Really? Okay, good.
What is being done to reduce the amount of salt in cheese? I've been sometimes able to get cheese that's marketed as saltless or reduced salt. It's wonderful. But most any cheese you get is laced with salt.
It's exactly right. And actually the artisan cheesemakers have a problem with that too. Some of those harder cheeses, Cooper Bold is another one, very high in salt. And there's a reason for it. It's not just because it's a flavor, but it's because you control the fermentation when you put salt in. But as people get better and better at making cheese, they're cutting down, they can cut down on the salt concentration. And right now, of course, there's a push to lower the salt in the American diet, and salt being cheese being a high salt product is under tremendous stress to figure out ways to get lower salt in it. But I know why some people put a lot of salt in it, so that they can control their cheese for a longer time.
Do you pasteurize it before you use it?
Well, it depends. Now, at OSU we tend to pasteurize, but most of the artisan cheesemakers, if they make aged cheese, they don't pasteurize. And the reason is not whether they want to pasteurize or not, but the reason is that the consumers want raw milk cheese. And I'll tell you, even though I know we're late, a very brief story. Last year, are you familiar with Bite of Oregon? That's there in the waterfront. So we did a study of 800 consumers who came to that festival. And these are kind of foodies. They are already a group that like food and wine. But we asked them, we gave them cheeses. And the first half we told them initially, here's a pasteurized milk cheese and here's a raw milk cheese. Which one do you prefer and why? And they all liked the raw milk cheese. Then the other 400 people, we gave the same cheeses, but we didn't tell them which was pasteurized and which one was raw. In fact, more people than like the pasteurized milk cheese. So it's, to a certain degree, it's mental, no, wait a minute, that came out, psychological. People think that the raw milk cheeses are better, and there's a lot of arguments why that might be so. I would tend to agree in many cases. But sometimes they come out more flavorful and even too flavorful for a lot of consumers. But Tillamook, for example, produces cheese from heat shock milk. It's not pasteurized. And over here, anything that's not pasteurized is raw. So Tillamook cheese is generally a raw milk cheese. People just don't know that. They don't advertise it.
Other than perhaps flavor, what is the real difference between a low-fat cheese and regular cheese?
You know, that's actually a long answer to that. It's at this point, low-fat cheeses are inferior to the full-fat alternatives. And I don't think it's ever going to be different. There's a lot of research going on, but there's such a difference in the texture. There's such a difference in how the bacteria works, how the biochemical reactions go, that at least right now you cannot make a good low-fat cheese. But if you start buying artisan cheeses that are very flavorful, you need much less cheese. So right there you cut the fat by using less quantity. Because you get some of those supermarket cheeses and you put on cheese and cheese and cheese. They're floating in cheese and fat because there's no flavor to the cheese. So you just cut back. So I think it's a much better approach, just increasing the flavor in the cheese and people use less cheese. But of course, if you're marketing it, that's not the way you want to go. Less cheese.
If you were going to try making cheese at home, soft cheese, is there a problem using homogenized milk?
Yeah.
Because that's all you get when you go to the supermarket.
But even just as big a problem is how much that milk was pasteurized. If you by mistake buy Dairy Gold milk that's also pasteurized in Portland, you cannot make cheese from that. Safeway milk that's pasteurized at a higher temperature than other milks, that one makes very poor milk too. You want to get the Fred Meyer milk, Mallory's milk, some of the others. Because that's the first thing. You can also buy skim milk and mix it with cream. That helps a little bit the problem of homogenization.
I was I make cheese at home, and not very good cheese yet. But I was at Safeway, and they didn't say whether it was ultra pasteurized or not, but every bottle of milk at Fred Meyer is ultra pasteurized.
It's certainly the,
At my Fred Meyer and my Safe, right?
oh, okay.
So it's the opposite of what you just
There's
said.
only one company in Oregon that has the facility to ultra pasteurize, and that's Dairy Goat in Portland. Safeway cannot ultra pasteurize, but they buy the cream, for example. They buy ultra pasteurized cream from Dairy Goat and put their label on it. But so that's a co-pack product. It's very expensive running ultra pasteurization. So if you can do it, and if everybody wanted to drink ultra pasteurized or ultra high temperature milk, then your Lockmeat, Eberhard, all the smaller dairy companies would be gone. They cannot afford that those systems.
About nutrition, I was thinking cheese is really good and hot dogs are really bad. And I took a pack of hot dogs and a pack of cheese and compared the fat and the protein and all that stuff, and the hot dog was about the same, a little bit, except for salt. It was twice the salt.
Now,
Is cheese really not that good?
here's the thing, and the dairy industry, we tend to talk about nutritionally rich calories. So, but you don't consume your dairy, you don't drink milk because you want your protein, even though it's very good protein. You don't drink it for the fat, you drink it for the calcium, the phosphorus, for the vitamin D. That outstanding combination for calcium absorption. So if you really want to look at it from a nutritional point of view, it's the minerals we are after in milk that are in a fabulous combination. You don't find anywhere else. And simply, of course, because milk is by nature, it is the product for the young calf, for the babies, for the young, so they grow as good as possible. And that's really why you see such a unique nutritional quality of milk. But yeah. I would say about the hot dog though, there's also an ethical question here. If you don't know what's in it, do you really want to consume that product? I would say cheese, I showed you, there's milk, enzyme, bacteria, and salt, and that's it. So no bad surprises.
Why are many of the Tillamook cheeses so dry and hard? What makes the cheeses so, why is somebody so creamy and nice? You can slice them, you can't slice those cheeses.
Oh, but that's
they
more,
crumble.
that's the characteristic of the cheddar. And actually it's more characteristic of the Gouda, Havarti, Danbo, or the other cheeses. You have a step in there where you take out about 1/3 of the whey and you put in 1/3 of water. And you wash out some of the lactose, and that means that the cheese is less acidic. And when it's less acidic, you have that kind of rubbery, flexible texture where you can take a column of cheese and you can basically bend it the whole way, it doesn't break. You do that to cheddar, you're 45 degrees and it breaks.
Yes.
And that's that washing step of the cheese curd.
Limburger comes from where?
I think it's German, isn't it?
German.
No, it's Dutch.
A Dutch! Yeah. Sorry, Mom's going to be after me here, but it's Dutch. All right.
The dairy place down in OSU, do they still sell ice cream cones?
No, it all shut down about in the 70s because of that complaint, which is really a crime. For one thing, that local dairy company's already shut down. It means for 35 years, our students did not get a good training in making dairy products. So you obviously had some ice cream.
Oh, yeah. Other products from there too, yeah.
Okay. Now another difference is my predecessor, Floyd Bodyfelt, was really into ice cream, where my preference really is with the cheeses.
What do you think about vegetarian attempts at cheese, like soy cheeses and that kind of thing?
I think it's fine now. What I don't understand is how they were ever allowed to call like soy milk or vegan cheese, how they were allowed to put the milk and cheese in there. Because a very strict definition in the Code of Federal Regulation to define what cheese and milk are. And somehow those other products got around that. But it's fine. There are people who are allergic, who cannot digest, metabolize dairy. I think, why not? And if there are people who prefer that flavor, by all means, yeah. I have to say no.
One or two more
no
questions.
cheese.
One or two more questions.
Where do you get organic cheese?
Organic cheese, actually you get it more places than you think. But organic is not something you put on the label that pays when it comes to cheese. There's no added value, which is really, really unique. Organic milk, no problem, people pay more for that. Organic cheese, they don't pay more for. So for example, Willamette Valley Cheese Company out of Salem, they are organic, but you won't find it on their label. They don't even put it on there, they don't waste the ink because they know it doesn't appeal to people. What people look for in cheese is local. That's the one thing on the label that really sells. But having said that, many of the artisan cheesemakers are organic. They're certainly most of them sustainable. It's a whole lifestyle that fits with artisan cheesemaking. So, but none of the, will find organic milk by Amfa, by Dairy Gold. They all have organic milk, but not organic cheese.
How about something about cream cheese, low fat and regular cream cheese? What can you tell us?
Yeah. What I can tell you, no. They don't make it in Oregon, and I've never really spent time looking into these processed cheeses just because we don't deal with those here in the state.
Okay, I really want to thank you. It was an incredible presentation. I can't believe it.